Afternoon. How we doing? Doing well? We all had lunch, so now we're not hungry anymore. Now we're just sleepy from after lunch. So welcome. This is Improve Your Thinking, Improve Your Software. And I'm Rachel Appel. I work at JetBrains as a developer advocate. So for many years, I've done software engineering and built products. And now I do a lot more of talking to people about building products. And then I chip in a little bit with our actual products that we build as well. So what this talk is going to be about is how we can get into a good mindset of thinking to be able to do overall software development and product building, which doesn't necessarily have to be software, but we're all developers or IT people here, so likely we're going to be building software products, and how to approach that with a critical thinking mindset. This mindset should also help you everywhere else that you need to think about things. So I'm going to talk about overall product building. What I'm not going to talk about is picking out an if statement and showing you how to think about that, or a loop, or some small piece of code. That's just coding. So what we're going to talk about is some of the larger scale things that developers need to do, because we're more than coders, right? We're developers and we build products. So we have to think about more than just those few lines of code that we're going to work with and develop, right? So we have to think about the products. So that's what we're going to talk about in here. So the first thing to note is, what is critical thinking? If I go through and I ask people, I say, do you think critically about things? Everybody says yes. I don't know anybody who goes, no, I don't think about things very well. Nobody says that. Then I say, okay, if I were to give you a problem, write down the steps of how you critically think. How many people have actually done that before? It's things we just don't do unless you had a formal logic class, in which you had to do that, or there's certain exercises that you can do for that. But most people don't. Most people don't think about thinking. That's so meta. But that's what we're going to do here. We're going to think about thinking and all the things in your daily life that, bleed over into software and back out again, and that's what we're going to deal with. So what is critical thinking? Google says it is the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. Okay. We all would say, are you objective? Yes, I'm totally objective. But most everybody says. But then you start digging and you find out, no, do you have a favorite sports team? If you watch sports, well, then you're not very objective about that. Right? There's no such thing as just objectiveness. Right? Do you have a favorite programming language? Are you really objective about that then? So things that you tend to like or dislike, you might kind of lean in those directions one way or another. And then that takes objectivity a little bit away. So the thing for us is to be aware of this so that we can temper that, so that that doesn't turn into too much of a bias. Dictionary.com says it's disciplined thinking. I like those words, right? Because you're actually kind of doing some structured thinking if you really apply it. So it's clear, rational, open-minded, and informed by evidence. The informed by evidence part is also important because a lot of people draw conclusions about a lot of things without much evidence at all for those things. So-and-so told me that this little herb might actually cure my cancer, and then they take it. And unfortunately, sometimes, actually often when people do that, they die, right? Because some trusted people thought they knew more than an oncologist, right? A doctor who works with cancer patients. And they don't really have any evidence to back that up, right? So that kind of stuff. You need evidence to actually form a rational opinion. So we do in software, and it's a skill. People tend to equate like critical thinking just with smart. Oh, I'm smart, so I don't need to sharpen my thinking skills. Well, that's actually untrue. You could be Einstein, but you have to think in a methodological way, and he did. So mathematicians tend to do this a lot, right? Because they kind of have to. But as business developers, your average developer at a corporation is not doing like super heavy math all day. Of course, there's outliers, and certain people do, but generally, a lot of applications are just business apps that don't have like, E equals MC squared in it, or you coming up with those kind of theories. It can also be difficult to do some thinking. One of the things you have to do with thinking is actually kind of know yourself. And I'll show some examples as we go through where you're going to hear pieces of input. And you ever have this happen? Somebody says something, right? So maybe someone will be like, I program in JavaScript. And then immediately, a lot of people are like, oh, ew, oh, dude, that's disgusting, right? Especially with JavaScript. People love to pile on JavaScript, right? And what's happening there? Are people really thinking about, well, does JavaScript solve this problem? Right? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But your first response is not a thinking response. Your first response was just an emotional response. So you have to be able to know when those emotions surface in yourself, and then be able to say, oh, right, I'm feeling that like uncomfortable feeling because somebody said the word JavaScript, and so am I gonna just not think clearly about it? Well, yes, if you don't recognize that that's what just happened, you're just going to be biased and dismiss it. So it can be difficult, and you have to make yourself uncomfortable, right? So, or actually, when you get that feeling, you have to recognize it and run with it and be able to think with it. So that's what I mean by making yourself uncomfortable, right? Letting pieces of information enter your brain that you would normally just dismiss, right? And like, oh, I don't like that. I don't want to hear it. This happens a lot. And how many times have you been in a meeting and somebody says, I have this idea, and then like, you actually see faces of people going, I don't like that idea, as an immediate reaction, right? Well, that doesn't do any good. You might not like it immediately, but that doesn't mean you should dismiss what they say, right? You need to think about it. Perhaps it should be dismissed, but you need to think about it first, not just take the emotional reaction. So how can we apply this to software? The first part is requirements. I know it is not the hip, cool thing to be going around saying, well, when I build software, I carefully gather requirements. This feels like something old people software programmers like myself do, right? Been around for a while. Yes, we've done the requirements thing. It seems very much more fun and hip and cool just to say, I write code without, any documentation or requirements, or even docking to people who might use my code. That seems to be the trend today. And often, hey, I'm a conference speaker, so I'm going to out all of the speakers. You go to conferences, and you do see all of us up here going, look at us whip up this code. You never see requirements in a talk, do you? So we maybe don't help with that. But this is where this happens a lot. So you have to sit with the stakeholders of the business and champions of the product you're building and users sometimes. And you have to actually deeply listen to what they say. And often you don't like what they're going to say or what they just said. Actually, let's face it, half the time if a user opens their mouth, I don't like anything that comes out of it, right? But you have to listen anyway. Feel uncomfortable about it, and then make a rational decision. So requirements is a biggie where this comes into play. This is kind of how it goes. You may have seen this one before, right? How the customer explained it. Oh, okay, yeah, that's what they wanted. That's another issue. Sometimes getting to the bottom of things. Customer didn't explain it right. Right? The project leader, how the engineer designed it. That is such a programmer thing, right? The sales executive. This is totally the sales executive. So this is every project, isn't it? Right, so these kind of things happen. So everybody kind of has these little miscommunications and oversights and little lapses in thinking about software. So listening, right? Not just putting on earphones and ignoring everything else like this, but just actually listening. So requirements, we need to listen. Another place where I see this, and here's some good examples of like not listening, social networking. Social networking has made me a bitter and angry human. Right? Thank you, the internet. You can't say anything. So we're all on like Twitter or Facebook or something, right? Most of us anyway. There are a few who don't. Every time you go to say anything, even stuff that seems to be very benign on social networking, and out of the woodwork, somebody does not understand what you said. Say 2 + 2 is 4, and somebody is not going to get it. For example, I can say, I like puppies. I really like them. They're furry and cute. And somebody will inevitably reply with, why do you hate kittens? Did I say that? I said I like puppies. Now, this is a thinking error in many ways, and this happens in requirements. A customer says something, and think of this. This happens in actual veterinarian software. Vets specialize with this little fur type or that little shell type of animal, right? They do have specialties. And you'll get that software developer sitting in the meeting and they say, well, we want to focus on puppies. And the developer says, well, you hate kittens, right? They usually don't say it like that in a meeting, but they're sitting there thinking, anti-kitten person, right? And then that thinking starts seeping into the software. Why do they hate kittens? I love kittens. And I'm going to try to make them love kittens too, right? I think, they're just anti-kitten. Well, so this person who's making this reply on Twitter or sitting in the software, meeting, they're doing a few things wrong here. First thing they're doing is not listening, right? If you can't even hear when somebody says, I like puppies, and take it at that face value, you've gone way over what you're supposed to be hearing. You're hearing things they're not saying. You're assuming things about that other person, right? So you may be assuming that they're anti-kitten or whatever, right? And think of this if you've ever had I'm not going to do political stuff in here, because then I'll just make everybody angry, right? But the same thing, it doesn't matter which side you're on of any issue. You can't even say something pretty innocuous without somebody taking it the wrong way and not thinking about it. They just let their emotions seep in. So this person's making assumptions. They might also be projecting. Maybe they're actually anti-puppy. Right? Maybe they're not, I don't know. I'm not going to make the assumption and make that same critical thinking thought or error. Right? But this is the kind of thing that happens, and this happens a lot. Maybe somebody doesn't jump up and yell, why do you hate kittens in a meeting? But, this happens in thought processes. They put stuff down in their notes about this. So you have to listen to people. That's the first thing for critical thinking. And requirements is where we need to listen the most. So there's some of the problems. Also, they're a little bit changing the subject. I mean, sure, they're both animals. If you're working with a vet, it's going to be a little bit more applicable, but very often this is going off the topic as well, right? But the person who responded just didn't listen. So fixing problems like this and thinking a little more clear. Well, when somebody says, I like puppies or I like kittens, well, you say, oh, okay. So what kind of puppies do you like? Right? Or what kind of kittens? Right? Particular breeds, the ones that are easy to train. Like, what are these facets of puppies if you said, I like puppies, kittens? So don't assume, right? Just take what they say and try to dig a little further, right? And that's all about requirements gathering, right? Is trying to do that, just digging deeper without assumptions and trying to not, get too bent out of shape about things. So here's something that I've seen actually this happen. A product owner says, we want to be able to automatically save data in this little program. And one of the developers was like, okay, they don't want manual save anymore. Let's remove the save button and just automatically save it. They never said that. They said we would like this extra ability, right? This ability to automatically save. Because they said that does not mean anything else. It does not mean that they want you to take away their ability to manually save, right? So there's another same sort of pattern and mistake. And as you'll notice, like when you go through and you're trying to do some structured thinking, there are patterns. And good thing we're developers, right? Because we're all about patterns. So you can start to spot these patterns, right? So it's the same as with the pups and kittens, right? People aren't listening, and then they're making assumptions. And we don't want to do that in requirements. How many times have you made an assumption, and then you start coding it, and you get most of the way through, and you're like, oh, crap. Next sprint, we got to undo all that because that's not what they wanted. This is a long-known thing in our business, right? We do all this coding, and we build these products, and then the customer goes, that's not what I wanted. That happens all the time. So that we want to try to prevent. So we have to dig. Just keep digging. Think of it as an onion, right? Just keep peeling those layers back until you get to that really stinky core. Right? It might be stinky in there. Right. There's that. So checking. So things that might help with this. You're using structured processes like Scrums and Agile and things like that. It doesn't necessarily help you think per se, but you at least get to work on that small chunk before you do too much damage and you can readjust, right? So that's what that helps. If you're doing stuff like DDD, the structured questioning and ubiquitous language kind of helps there, because then what that does is it gets everybody using the same definitions, so you kind of get rid of a lot of assumptions, right? Or any assumptions that you feel that you have to make because you didn't quite get enough information, actually write them down. These are assumptions. We need to get this cleared up as soon as we can. So that way at least you know what is an assumption and how you can deal with it before somebody starts coding that, and then that assumption turns out wrong, right? Because assumptions get a lot of features that people did not want. Domain experts also help, working with those product owners and listening to them. Here's another one. This creeps in all the time. The very religious developer. Hey, you want to be religious? Sure, go to church. Like, they're all over the place, right? But you hear this all the time, right? My cloud's better than your cloud, and the whole tabs versus, like, seriously, people, tabs over spaces, or curly brackets. Like, developers love to just argue about this stuff, right? And all right, so I have to say, I do find some joy and entertainment in trolling people online about brackets. But I am not ever serious. I'm just in there poking at people to get them angry because I'm a jerk sometimes. So that's just me. But I don't religiously have any, I do not demand that any team I'm on, do one of these because it's better. And whenever you say something's better, you need to back it up with why. Well, why is the curly brace on the same line better? Half the time, when you see this online argument, nobody can actually give you a reason why. If you sit down and think about it, you probably can. So then that means that you're thinking about it at some point, but before then, maybe not. But you see this all the time. Choosing a language. And this is a big one. So there's kind of two aspects to this. You choose a language. There's people who are like, oh, I will just never use X. Okay. But there might be some scenario where X is really the best choice. Right? Maybe there's a domain-specific language that's the best choice. Or maybe for a particular niche industry, functional programming or object-oriented or procedural even, there's various general-purpose languages that tend to work for most projects. And what happens is a lot of us in our careers just go, hey, I'm this developer, I'm Java, or I'm .NET. Like, I've done .NET forever. So when a new project comes in, .NET tends to be the first thing that comes into my mind. I'm going to recommend .NET. But when that happens, if it's the first thing that came into your mind, then I'm not really thinking about it. And I've done that before. Yeah, let's just go with .NET. And I didn't actually give two thoughts as to whether the project should be in .NET. It's just that that's what I do. And even if the project isn't really the best thing for like C# or .NET, I'm going to put that square peg in that round hole anyway. Right? And that happens quite a bit. So choosing a language is something where this happens a lot. You have to consider a lot of things, like the skill levels of people on the team and what might be in the future. Also, how easy is this to maintain? I have a friend that was doing F#, perfectly fine language, functional, has very good purposes. And he actually built this really nice product, and it's the type of product that F# would lend itself to being a very good language for. And then what happened was he ended up being the rest of the team just didn't want to learn F#. And then they ended up going back to C#, even though that was not the best solution for this particular. Can't give away any NDA information here, but that's kind of how that went. And I was like, oh, good project, just got scrapped with really nice code, stuff that the customers liked, right? They liked that final result. So we had good code and happy customers. That's what we want, right? That is good code and happy customers. It's like a double bang. It's awesome. But nope, they go back to C#. And then the customers were actually not as happy. But the developers the other ones did not have to learn F#. Okay, I'm going to call that not the best decision, right? Because people didn't really think about the fact that maybe that was better and they should learn it or get different team members. So there's a lot of things like that when you're choosing a language. People get religious. Religion is great, again, if you're just going to be religious, but in technology, it casts blinders on you. And then it makes it very, very difficult to do things. So that's one. There was stuff that was more mathematical, and there was like a real estate prediction investment app is the one that I was just talking about. Not to say all real estate prediction investment apps should have F#, but this one in particular was perfect, but no, in that case. So a lot of things you have to think about there. But the bottom line is to actually stop and do the thinking first. Too many times we just move forward with what we know and what we've always done because we don't want to get out of our comfort zone. And that happens a lot with the religious stuff, right? We'll always do braces on this line, and we'll always use this language or that platform or whatever. So there's some issues with that, the whole vendor lock-in thing, right? So some people go, oh, we can't, we're locked in. You're not really ever locked into anything, right? You can get out of it. Also, popular things. People go, oh, let's just do this new thing because it's new and shiny. There's at least that one person on every team that does this. Let's do this new JavaScript framework. You're like, but this is a database. And I don't think Vue is the best thing for that. So that happens. And then, of course, a bias called confirmation bias. There's a lot of that, right? Because I like this language, so I'm going to find reasons to use it. And it's very easy once you like something to keep finding reasons why you should keep doing it. Or if you dislike something, why that thing should be the most hated thing, right? That's a confirmation bias. And that's something we tend to do a lot. So critical thinking. That's what we're going to talk about next. Biases and fallacies. So I did a little bit of requirements and a little bit of things like, hey, religion, these kind of tie in. And, I could stand here for the next 2 days and go over all the fallacies and biases. Actually, it would take more than 2 days. But this part of the talk is going to apply to design. And we're actually going to look at these fallacies and biases in a little bit more depth. So a bias and a fallacy. So biases are just kind of what I explained. If you have a favorite sports team, you're going to root for them. And you might root for other teams that are not playing your team, but usually based on their relationship to your team. Maybe they're not in the same league, so it's okay to like them and root for them, or something like that. That's an easy one, it's a sports bias. And sports people generally kind of know where they're biased, right? But there's a lot of other biases. Like I've done .NET. I have a .NET bias. Like I said, I tend to just go, oh yeah, .NET, let's go with that. That's my bias talking. And then confirmation bias will have me saying, well, this is why we should do it. And here's another reason for .NET, because I like that. And I'm going to think of all these great reasons why we should use it. So it's a bias. Fallacies are a little different. They kind of tie in together. But fallacy is an actual error in your thinking. And I started to talk with the fallacy, the whole puppies and kittens. If you hear somebody say something and you don't listen to them and you make that assumption, that's an actual error in your thinking. Biases, things to know about biases, particularly in the US. I'm originally from the US. So I walk around with a US-centric bias. Then I moved to Germany a while back. And then now I walk around with a bit of a Deutsche bias, right? I do things more the German way. And people go, Jesus, you're German now, right? And stuff like that. So your bias, it can change to different things. In the US, though, a lot of people tend to think this is a bad word. And they throw it around when they want to slur at people. Oh, you're biased. This news is biased. That's biased. As if it's binary. It's not. So bias is a spectrum, and every single human has it because the definition of it is the fact that you're alive. Unless you are in a coma from the minute you were born and never got off life support, where you had literally no experiences, where you were conscious, that's the only way you could not have bias. So bias is the fact that you have an experience. That experience folds into your brain, and then either kind of liking it or disliking it, you're going to lean a little bit more of one way. And that's all that it is. It's often unconscious. Now, you could have just a flat-out recognized bias. You know, I hate sugar or something like that, whatever. But most of it is unconscious. And it's like having a heart and lungs, right? Everyone has it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just there. What is wrong is if you learn that you have this, and then you pretend that you don't. Or you just act like you don't. Like, no, I don't have bias. You do. And literally, it is a bias to say that. Very meta again. Right? I don't have bias. Well, that's because you're biased for yourself. Right? Yeah. So it's a spectrum. Bias can go all the way into prejudice. Right? So a little bit of bias might be certain unconscious behaviors. If you see a big burly person at the subway stop, dude with like all these tattoos and biker helmets, you might go, scary, a little bit, and not even realize that you did that. But then you could go right into prejudice for other people. All right, so bias on the baseline and that end of the spectrum tends to be more unconscious. You don't even know you're doing it. It's just a thing. But you can surface these biases, right, and figure them out and tamper them and help eliminate some of them. You cannot eliminate them all. We all have them, and it's okay that we do. What's not okay is if it goes over into prejudice and you know that you're doing that and you keep doing that. Right? So some real world issues with bias. Right now, I didn't even get to update the slide. AI, machine learning, is rampant. Every day I see a new article. Amazon's AWS, they had an AI algorithm for hiring, and it rejected all the women. And medications have been, at least in the US, geared for white men of a certain age as well. And they tested them and then forgot about children, forgot about people of color. And then they're giving kids doses that would kill them in the trials. And then the kids are going to the hospital and nearly dying before they go, oh, we have to adjust the doses on this medicine. So this is clearly documented in medical research. So a lot of this is just who they've been using for the trials. And what happens is our bias is like, look I am a privileged white woman from the US. And then who am I I grew up around a lot of white people. And then who am I going to tend to, by my bias, just gravitate toward first? Not even thinking or realizing it. Other white people, right? So what you need to do is say, oh, I recognize this happens. It's unconscious, but I'm going to surface it and deal with it so that I can balance that and think better and balance my bias better. It's okay to have it. We all do that. It's from experience, right? But it's when you know that you have this and you just refuse to do anything. Seatbelts also. Kids in the US have to ride in the back of the car because for decades, they did not make crash test dummies as a child size, right? And they just made slightly smaller ones for women. So seatbelts are not very good either. AI detects white people's faces really good, but not people of color, at least in the US. Now, when law enforcement gets a hold of this and starts applying it, then you have a lot of issues, right? Where they're being unfairly, illegally targeting people, right? And you may well know in the US we have some issues, right, with police brutality and people of color. So that's actually playing right into that. So bias, if it's not checked, it's okay to have it, right? But it's when it starts to seep out and then people recognize that it has and you do nothing about it or you let it go. That's when there's the issue, right? So if you want to reduce bias, things you could do is shoot for working with people on a product team who are total opposite of you. This is also innovation. If everybody's like you, you're literally not going to be able to come up with any different ideas. You need people who are different. So what you need is empathy. You need to be able to understand and hear people, again, hear people. You need to investigate and, again, hear what they say, keep digging deeper. Avoid generalizations about people and users. Peer review, so put products out there. Have really good people testing, right? Try to get as many public people from various places to test. Have a diverse team and check fallacies as well. All these things will help reduce bias. Again, you'll never get rid of it entirely, but it's just about recognizing as much as you can and trying to even it out. When you do this, it doesn't just make it better for those other people, it makes it better for everybody. Confirmation bias is one bias. There's some other ones. I love this one, the IKEA effect. This affects developers a lot. You might have also heard of this as not invented here syndrome. Right? People start building something, and then because you put some effort into building it, that thing is so awesome, and they don't want to change it or fix it. They like it just how it is, right? This happens quite a bit, right? You get so invested. People do this with stocks and money. They get so invested, even though the stock starts dipping and dipping, and then they're uncomfortable and sweating, and it keeps going. And then they wait too long and lose everything instead of just maybe dumping it when they should. Functional fixedness, right, where you kind of get stuck on things and you kind of get caught in a rut. Curse of knowledge is another one. If you're here at a conference, you're probably prone to this. You're out here learning a little bit more than other people, right, because you're attending conferences or maybe reading online about your craft. And then you just kind of go, well, I know all this stuff, so doesn't everyone else, right? No. So I remember a couple times people on my team have said, well, isn't that common knowledge? Not. There's always something people don't know. As a matter of fact, I was in New York City a few years ago, maybe 3. I was in a supermarket, and some guy ahead of me was actually buying cigarettes. He goes, I never knew until last month when my doctor said how bad smoking is for you. I really didn't get that was a thing. And I'm like, which rock did this guy live under? But that's how it is. There's always somebody who doesn't know, right? Just because you know. Anchoring effect, car salespeople use this. They'll start with a high anchor price because if they also do this when you're negotiating for a job, right? Always overshoot the salary, anchor it way high, and then they'll come down low, not as low as they normally would have. Actually use that bias to your advantage to get more money at your next job, right? So you could do that. But this also happens in product design, right? We did this feature and then we anchored ourselves there. And now we're kind of stuck in it. And things like the functional fixedness keep us stuck in there when in fact we could build a better product. And I'll out ourselves at JetBrains. If you look at our UTrack issues, sometimes you'll see an issue with a whole lot of upvotes that isn't getting fixed, and this is why. So educate yourself. Now that's just a couple of, 8. If you go to Wikipedia and you look at list of biases, they're like this huge list. So you're not gonna sit and memorize them all. But if you sit and go through them and start to look at them, you'll see these all have patterns to them, right? And how when a piece of information comes in, or something that you're supposed to think about, that there's a pattern that you can detect, that something's kind of amiss, that there's a little red flag that you could look into. One of the things, again, is if you first feel an uncomfortable or something like, I totally agree with that, or I totally disagree with that, immediately stop. And then say, why do I agree or disagree with that? And then, do I agree or disagree because I'm just confirming my bias? What does this other person really have to say? All right, so you have to stop, gauge your feeling, and then investigate. So that will help with software, especially when somebody's asking for, a user comes in and they say, I want this new feature. I don't know how many times I see developers going, no, you don't, no, you don't. You didn't even listen to them. Right? Didn't hear what they had to say, and you're dismissing it already. So that's a little bit of biases, and they sneak up all over the place. So having people not like you and just bouncing ideas off of a lot of other people, knowing that there's a whole bunch of fallacies and biases and reading through what's available will help you at least reduce them a little bit. And then just keep practicing, what bias can I try to get rid of today or try to kind of tamper today? Will it be confirmation bias? How do I do this, right? And then just kind of go through the internet, see some examples, and think about where you might be doing that. Now, fallacies are the errors in thinking, and they often start as a bias. Some common ones, I've seen this in software, a slippery slope argument. If we do this, and we implement this feature, it's going to be terrible and hard to maintain, and the users aren't going to like it, and it's just going to go right downhill. How many times is something proposed, and there's that one person in the meeting who goes, oh, no, it's all going to go downhill, right? Because you're just going to slip down the slope. Okay. Well, that's an automatic fallacy. Sometimes you might set up a scenario where you actually do slip down a slope. But most of the time you could say, well, in our scenario, if we implement this feature, we can put a hard control so it doesn't get out of hand. So if the users want a little blinky thing, okay, we'll give them 1. And we'll put a hard control in there to stop. We won't allow them to have 2,500 blinky things on the screen, no matter how much they ask. You have kids, you do this dance with them every day, right? I want blah, 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 right? No. And then you cave in a little, and you're like, okay, this one, you can have this, just shut up already, go away, you're bugging me, right? And so you didn't let them slide all the way down that sugary slope until they're in a sugar fit, right? You give them a little piece and go away, right? So that's something that happens a lot. False cause, right? This happens in bugs, right? This bug comes up and then the developer goes, oh, yep, that's Gary's fault. He did that, yep. Why? Because of this other thing. So often without thinking, we just say, if A happened, then B happened, they must be related, and A must have caused B. Is that really true? Could there be some other mysterious other thing that you didn't think about that caused B? Right, so this happens, right, like a causal fallacy, right, where you think that the cause of something, and here's one, PEBCAC, right, problem exists between keyboard and chair. Right, how many times have we used that? User error, right, this is an easy one, user error, right, well, maybe it's not the user. I mean, it might be, there's always a chance it might be, but maybe it's not, right, we do have to investigate that. Black and white thinking, this happens a lot, right? Either ors. Often, it could be both or neither, right? So black and white thinking happens. A no true Scotsman is another one that I see a lot in tech, right? So, and this is kind of ties back to the religion part, right? No real developer writes in JavaScript. You hear that like every day on the internet. No real developer actually puts comments in their code, stuff like that. Really, what is a real developer? Like, you didn't even define that. So you're just making shit up. That's what you're doing at that point. Like, I like to do this as a developer, so I'm going to say people who don't are not actual developers. That's all that means. Also, fundamental attribution. This is another one. We blame the users, right, because they're idiots. We're not. Same thing, you're walking down the street and you trip. Oh, the sidewalk is a little crooked. If somebody else does it, oh, they're dumb, they tripped. And that's how that works. How often in software do you attribute a bug or an error or something to the wrong cause? Like all the time. I see this all. I look at tickets all day and I see this all the time. Your product sucks because I did this and this is the cause. And it's, no, that's not it. All right, so this happens all the time. So there are a few common fallacies. Places I like to go online is if you go to yourlogicalfallacyis.com, it will actually give you a list of them and it'll give you like a fallacy of the day. And you can go to Wikipedia and you can look at a long list of them. And these are all various ways where you're thinking about something, but a bug got in the software, right? And that's okay, right? Because everybody in here, everybody in the world, if you say, are you perfect? Very few people are going to say, yes, indeed, with all seriousness, right? No, of course I'm not perfect. But then when it comes to fallacies, people behave like they are, right? Which is a bias. Isn't it, right? Oh, well, I don't make that fallacy. Well, I don't make that one. I don't make that one. Well, you don't make any of them, then you're perfect. Oh, no, I'm not perfect. Are you thinking about this? Right? Because we're not. So it's okay. It's okay to have a little bug in the software, in the people software in your head. It's okay to have the biases. What we're here to do is to try to recognize when any of these happen, and then try to be able to dispose of it or make it a little bit better, right? So that it's not quite so malicious, right? So problem solving along with this, thinking outside of the box, or you can be a cute kitten again and be in the box because cats like that. So here's a literal outside of the box question. You see this, and I have a YouTube link, you can see a little video how they do this. And I say, you have maybe 4 strokes, and you can take your pen, you have to connect all of the dots, but your pen cannot leave the paper. You can't pick your pen up. People do the stuff like that. They'll try and they'll kind of explore and they'll be like, ah, crap, that doesn't work. How about this? How about that? And they'll sit there for a while going, ah, this is one of those puzzles. And then just with a little nudge, what'll happen is if I say, well, most people who try this will not actually take their pencil and move it past the dots. They think that there's a literal box here where those dots are. And once you hear that hint, then people go, oh, so I could do something like that. Right? And just consider this one stroke, even though I'm showing it in multiple parts. So if I went outside of the box, then out again, I have now got all of the dots, right? This went through all of the dots. So if we stop and think differently, in this case, literally outside of the box, then we could come to the solution. And that little YouTube link has a whole series of cool little things like this, these kind of puzzles that are fun to try out. Not everybody's a puzzle person. But for problem solving, for things like this, yes, you'd probably do some experimentation. That's good. Exploration, experimentation, I already mentioned that. But remember, there's constraints that you put on yourself. And one of them is this, like thinking that it's an actual box you have to stay in. So things you have to do is when you're solving a software problem, you need to say, well, are these really the constraints? Like I kind of feel like there's this constraint. Is that really there? It might be there, but it might not. Right? So if we think about that, we can kind of actually go outside of the box. With that, patterns help. Right? Again, a lot of this is about patterns. Patterns, and often they're really good in software. Use patterns for almost everything. And they also tend to help with thinking because you get a structured way of doing something. But sometimes they're not. Especially if you're religious about a pattern and you try to apply it where it doesn't belong, right? Then it doesn't. It turns into an anti-pattern. And I could go on about anti-patterns for the next 4 or 5 days. But I see a lot of them. You see them in business, you see them in coding, people doing things, and they're doing it in a pattern way, but that way is just not really working. And that happens a lot. Also, another thing to help with this, all of this, is what's called emotional intelligence. We tend to think that IQ is the big deal, but EQ actually helps more in software than any of this. And this is starting to become popular in software circles. Emotional intelligence means that you are aware of everything I talked about. Right? You may not be able to scratch out every bias you have, and you might still make fallacies. We're all going to do that. But when you're building software, instead of sitting there and building it with the mindset that has been the traditional mindset for decades, which is I build it as if I'm going to use it in just me. But then you realize there's 7 billion people on this earth, and a significant amount of them use software, and they might be different than you, and they might use it different than you, even if they do look just like you, and come from where you're at. So we have to be able to get in their shoes and have that empathy and have a self-awareness that we are not the same as everyone else. You have to be able to manage that. You have to have a social awareness. And I think all these terrible stereotypes over the last few decades about developers being, basically living in their parents' basement with no hygiene or friends or life or anything is just not done us any favors, because social awareness is important. Look at even GitHub, social coding, right? And managing relationships. So those are things that you have to do. So for some thinking examples, here's another one. Here's an argument. You need a degree to get a good job in software. Do you? What was your first reaction? Like, I agree, I disagree, right? That's one of those emotions. Stop. Really, do you? Well, first thing is to question it, recognize your feeling. Then we start to define stuff like ubiquitous language. Well, what is a good job? Is it the same here as it is in the UK, right, or the US, right? What exactly would the role be, right? So you need to ask the questions. And what kind of degree? Right, so before you even say, I agree or disagree, you really need this other info. But a lot of people, the minute they see this question, they yes or no, right? And if your immediate response like that, then you're not applying critical thinking, right? So we need to recognize that and then stop, right? And then say, there's questions. I need to ask questions here and get to the bottom of this first. So that we need to do. Right, so even more, like, what do the experts say about this? What about HR departments? Tons and tons of questions you could come up with to help structure your thinking and peel away those layers of the onion. For this particular, as a nice non-political example, right? And this is argued about online all the time as well. And a lot of people are just like, yes, no. And often their reasoning is, I have a degree or I don't have a degree. That's not good enough, right? That does not answer the question when we say, do you need a degree? Like you, the general people, does anyone need a degree? So if you're answering for an individual yourself, sure, it's whatever you have, if you have it or don't. But other than that, no, you can't really speak for other people without saying like, look, here's all the questions, and then here, I think probably you do or you don't, based off of what answers you get and what locale you're talking about and all those other factors. And just think, if you were writing software, helping people through their career, right, like career builder or something, then that would be the same thing, right? You need to write software with those questions. Myths. So try to be a myth buster. If you've ever seen the show from the US Mythbusters, it's awesome and they blow up stuff. So here's something that happens growing up all the time, every Halloween. People are putting razor blades in the candy. This is terrible, you're going to die, don't eat the candy. Then why are we Halloweening as kids, right? Well, if you think about it, the candy bars, very crappy candy bars that are only this big, they should be like this big, but that's a different story. This big. Razor blade is like this big. Logistically, did you ever try to do that just to see if it is a myth or not? It doesn't work. So it turns out that when you look online at police stations, many police stations in the US say, no, we've never had a report where somebody had found razor blades in their Halloween candy. Yet in the US, this was a myth for my entire childhood, which caused my mother a great deal of concern. We were not allowed to eat that candy. No matter how badly we wanted this candy, I am traumatized by this. I was not allowed to eat that candy until it was thoroughly checked. And I'm like, but the razor blade is bigger than the candy. How would this work? And you can't put it in hard candy. How does that work? No, that might be, tainted. Trauma. So anyway, but it was a total myth. But it got onto the news one year, and then everybody just believed it because, it was just simply what they considered a credible source. Well, even the news gets it wrong. Doesn't mean all news is wrong all the time, but sure, credible sources can be wrong. So look for myths and just do amateur myth busting. It's a favorite thing for me to do. Find out, if you hear something going around, a rumor, to see if you could poke holes in it, right? And use structured thinking to do that. And that's a good, easy one. So it's not plausible, right? Same thing in the US now, it's, people are giving out marijuana edibles. Look, nobody who smokes pot is actually giving it away to children. Other than that, when you're all out of other ideas, here you go, that's the answer to life. 42, for anybody who has seen the movie. So, yeah, life, universe, and everything is just 42 if you can't come up with anything else. So, sometimes the answer is that you don't know. Don't forget, now, no matter how much thinking you do, you're looking for answers to and solutions. Sometimes that is, I don't know, it depends, maybe. It's not always a hardcore yes or no, or formula, or a hard answer. Sometimes you have to say, I don't know, and continue looking, right, until you could maybe find a solution. So I've only given a few things that I could throw out in an hour, but hopefully that will get everybody at least, give you a bit of a framework to start approaching software development, trying to look at tampering biases and fallacies, and apply structured thinking and the watching your response, immediate response, and kind of dealing with emotions. So thank you for coming, and I'll just be meandering about for questions and things. So I got questions. Do I exercise critical thinking on a daily basis? I actually try to do these exercises, but I don't get to do it every day. And then how do you pick challenges that are a little bit above your comfort zone, but not that overboard as to get overwhelmed? And that's where I say do the myth busting. Actually go online and look for hoaxes and myths, and you'll see tons of them. Halloween legends, Christmas stuff. So just like go online and start being like a little amateur hoax buster, and that should help with that. So.